Howell Price. I'm from Southwest Mississippi Community College. Come on in. I will warn you when you leave out, these doors will lock, but if you look in there and look directly at me in that back corner, I'll let you back in. So, I'm a workforce training coordinator here. Today I'm kind of playing the part of a facilitator, and we're happy to have you here if you have any questions about the facility itself. You're welcome to ask me anything, but in the meantime, I'm going to introduce Mr. Randy Williams. He's the Vice President and Wealth Management Consultant with the Trustmark National Bank. He received a BS with an emphasis in finance from the University of Southern Mississippi to the top, and Master of Science in Financial Services from the American College in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He holds a life and variable contracts license with Series 7, 63, and 65 security licenses. Mr. Williams is also a certified financial planner professional and holds the Chartered Financial Consultant designation. He is a member of the Mississippi Estate Planning Council. Randy is a native of McGee and lives with his wife Susan, daughter Wright, and in Madison, and they attend St. Matthew's United Methodist Church. Randy also enjoys hunting and watching college football in his time away from work.
Not anymore though. Southern Miss.
Oh yeah.
Bless her.
That was a mouthful, so
Yeah.
I hope I got that right. So I'll turn it over to Randy.
Thank you very much, Amanda. And I appreciate all of y'all coming today and stopping in and hearing us today. And hopefully y'all can get some useful information. I'm not going to get really a mile deep in any one topic. I would love for this to be Q&A. You know, I'd love for y'all, let's just kind of pause in between as we go through some of the slides. And please feel free to ask questions. I think that just helps everybody when we have an open discussion like that. One question, the main topic we're going to talk about is a topic that's very unique, and it's a topic we probably hadn't heard all day today. We're going to talk about investments. Have y'all heard anything on investments or asset allocation? Well, that's supposed to be a joke, but my joke's not working too good. I figured everybody's probably hitting y'all up with investments and asset allocation, and you just had a lunch on it and so forth. And I'm going to briefly touch on that. I'm going to get what we feel is the fundamentals to investing. At the end of the day, you got all the bells and whistles and unique products out there in the marketplace. But really, at the end of the day, if you stick to the fundamentals, you should be fine when it comes to investing. And then I'm going to get over into some other areas that I think may be useful. Just briefly about Trustmark. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. Most of y'all might be familiar with this from a banking standpoint. Currently, Trustmark Bank has over 167 offices there across 5 different states. You see our most recent acquisition we had was in Mobile, which was Bank Trust. It was about a $2 billion bank. And currently today, Trustmark is a little bit over a $12 billion bank, headquartered out of Jackson, Mississippi. And this year we actually hit our 125th anniversary. We started in 1889 with 10 gentlemen. Put up $100,000 in 1889, and 125 years later, here we are today. The trust division, myself, and I apologize, I didn't introduce Jerry Thornhill. Jerry Thornhill works with us in the personal trust department at Trustmark, and that's the division Jerry and I are in. You've got banking, you've had banking for years, but also banking has evolved to offer other services out there. Jerry and I have both been on the wealth management side, and within that hub, we are in the actual personal trust area of our bank here. The actual trust division, wealth management division of Trustmark is actually $12.9 billion. So we're actually a little bit larger in asset-wise than our actual bank as a whole. So a pretty big footprint when it comes to this type of business and services we'll talk about later. We have 10 trust offices. Headquartered, of course, is still out of Jackson there. We have approximately about 115 associates that work in medium, professional, medium, have law backgrounds, professional designations, and so forth. Because a lot of the discussions we have with clients are more than just investments. It's trying to figure out how to plan and think for that next generation. And so we have plenty of professionals that work with many families in covering those needs. At Trustmark, we look at kind of wealth and building wealth. You know, basically all of us, we are exposed to 3 different life cycles. Every one of us in this room, okay? We start out in our early years, we're just trying to accumulate. We're just trying to have something, okay? That may be through an employer, through our retirement plan, through outside savings. It may be I've been in farming all my life. It could be be I've been a small business owner, whatever it may be. We all start out in that accumulation phase of life. But eventually, as we get older, we want to start thinking about, it's not so much about accumulation, it's about preserving what I've got in place here, okay? And now it's not so much, let's figure out how can I preserve the wealth that I've created, whatever that may be, whatever that number may be, and when you get to that point. Typically, we get to that later in life as we get closer to retirement. We start thinking about more preserving these because we don't have to start back over. And so typically, Jerry and I in the personal trust really focus for families that are working in that preservation phase, that are getting to that area of their life, and then also the transfer of wealth. What is that? That means now that I've gotten to this point, a lot of us are bad, talking about wills and trust and all that's not the funnest topic. And then you start talking about family members and who to benefit and so forth, and how should we do it. That's an easy subject to put off. A lot of us do. And most people, and when we have discussions, once they get to that preservation phase, they realize that I put it off long enough. I need to sit down and really look at this and put some things on paper to see what I need to be doing. So that gets more into the wills and trust discussion. We'll talk a little bit more here today. Fundamentals of investing. I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail on this because I think y'all already have a lot of investments. And so I don't want to sit here and bore y'all today about investments and asset allocation. But really, it's so simple, just sticking to the basics. Okay? You've heard about asset allocation, properly diversifying your investments. And that's what the market's about. I'm going to go flip over the budget slides. What happens to most clients or most people that have had any market exposure? Typically, you've had some experience to where if you look here at this chart here, basically that's just depicting, and if you see the green line there, somebody starting out with $10,000, and then over that 10-year period, they ended up riding it up to about $40,000. They wrote it back down, and now they're back up to about $25,000. But as investors, most of us never experience that ride, okay? As investors, most all of us, what we do is if you see the blue bars there, that's money going into that fund, okay? And that's typically what happens to most investment options out there. And so really there's not a whole lot of activity, a whole lot of inflow going into the fund. And then finally, when that fund has done really well, it's called chasing the last year's good ones, and advisors are bad at marketing those, magazines are bad at marketing those. But generally, last year's winners are probably going to be this year's losers, okay? You've got to be careful. But what happens is, as an investor, you finally get confidence, you want to buy this investment that's done so well, it sounds so great, and then all of a sudden, we have a correction in the market, or some people call them recessions, we just like to call it a slight correction. Then look at the money flow start coming out of it. And that's typically what we do as investors, and once we get that experience, most of the time, we never get back in there. That's our one experience that we had in the market. We think that's the only way the market works, and we probably never in any way or fashion get back into the market to invest. This here is just kind of builds on what we just talked about there. This here is the importance of staying invested. Whatever is y'all, hopefully y'all come into a lot of opportunities coming to you, and hopefully it lasts for a while. And as that happens, what you want to do from an investment standpoint is identify what you're comfortable with from a risk perspective and stay the course. Unfortunately, we don't stay the course, and most times, clients are probably typically are not as risky as they think they are, okay? Losing $10,000 feels a whole lot different than gaining $10,000. Once you see that $10,000 drop in your account, all of a sudden you're ready to take a different approach. That blue line right there that you see, to me, that is like a fictitious number, okay? Well, you say, Randy, well, that's a real fund right there that went for that 10-year period. What do you mean? Most people never experience that blue line because most people have gotten out, whether you got down here at the bottom and you were the green line and you stayed in cash and you said, I'll never get back in that market again, or finally you got out and then you edged back in maybe a year or so later and you're that navy blue line, okay? And so most investors, the market, the difference between that blue line and all of us sitting here in this room, including myself, is emotions, okay? It's emotions. When you start losing $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, especially if you're not invested for your risk profile, what are you probably going to do? You're going to change course, okay? But over time, if you were emotionally able to handle that, then you would have made that whole return there. And so at Trustmark, our focus is, the biggest focus when we get in front of a client is trying to hone in on that risk and what we truly feel like that you're going to be able to be comfortable with, not just in good markets, but in down markets. This here is probably, of all these come out every year, it's probably one of my favorite slides when you kind of talk about the market. This is talking about time in the market. So when you look at time in the market here, this is so interesting on the slide that basically what it's telling you is over the last 10 years, from 93 to 2012, there's been 5,040 trading days. Okay? That's how many trading days there are during that period of time. If you would have stayed invested, which probably very few people did, if you had stayed invested in there that whole time, you would have made 8.2%. But at some point, you got out of the market because the market's naturally going to have its corrections, okay? And when you got out, if you missed, if I came into you and said, all I want is your 10 best days you had in that market, okay? So over that 10-year period, I just want you to give me your 10 best, and I'll let you have all the others. Well, if you gave me your 10 best days in the market over that 5,000 trading day period, your return would have gone from 8.2% down to 4.5%, okay? It's that much a dramatic effect. Most of your return, and a lot of your return when you see in the market, those that are invested in there, those large days that are in the market, a lot of those come off the bottom. Well, very few people ride the bottom, okay, and stay with it, you know. So typically we get out, and so we miss those first several months of the market where the market's rebounding. And that's where you miss a lot of those really good days in the market. And why your return may not be as good as what they quote say the market return is. It's because we missed those critical days. Okay, managing risk by diversification. Anybody want to tell me how does one become wealthy? And this is not inherent, can't inherit money. So how does somebody self-made typically become wealthy? Work. You gotta have that in you if you're done.
Save your money.
Save your money. Any other ideas?
Strike all.
Strike all? Yeah. That's a really good one. That's a really good one.
Compound interest.
Compound interest. And that's probably the most powerful tool out there is compounding of interest. But actually what it is non-diversity. Staying all your eggs in one basket, okay? Jerry and I, in our roles, have the opportunity to travel the state, and we've met with a number of clients and families that have been very successful. The one thing most all of them have in common, if they made wealth, like true wealth, is they had all their eggs in one basket. It was that small business owner that had just, the business took off. Or if they were vested in the market in some way, it was some company that they were an executive in or something like that, where they had a lot of stock in from the startup standpoint, okay? My point is, people don't become rich in the stock market. And I think a lot of times people have that presumption, not that you're going to become rich, but you're going to make a lot of money. If you've got that perception that you're going to make a lot of money in the stock market or do very, very well, you're going to be disappointed, okay? Because the market is not designed to get you wealthy. But what the wealthy have done, that have accumulated these assets and been fortunate enough to have all their eggs in one basket, and now they're getting to a point to preserve and diversify more. Now they utilize the market to their advantage, okay? And, that's why, how do you remain wealthy? It's diversification. And that's what you're doing there. Eventually, no matter, if you did it through land or if you did it through, a small business or whatever it may be, eventually you're going to get to that point, and typically, probably as you get to your 50s and definitely in your 60s, you're saying, I got to quit having all my eggs. This has been a great asset for me, but I need to spread it out. That's when people start saying, hey, let me spread it out and get a diversified portfolio that I'm comfortable with to start preserving some of what I have. Just in case this has worked so well the last 20 years, it made all this well, just doesn't go away, That there, this slide here is basically just talking about managing risk versus return, okay? most of us, if we've had any experience in the market, I would guarantee you that most of you, and you're not in there, or you kind of had your foot wet, you're backing in, you're out, you're probably not where you need to be from a risk standpoint. You probably have bought an investment. A lot of times we see people, I got $30,000, what can I do with it? And you end up, it's not really an overall plan. You bought an investment, and it really probably didn't match your risk profile. And typically, you're probably going to be more of the aggressive, the 80-20 stock to bond, or the 100% stock. With these 5 portfolios, these are 5 standard portfolios that everybody has, okay? That this is the efficient frontier. I'm not going to get to the technicalities of it today. But basically, what it's talking about is the left-hand side shows you the return of each portfolio. That's the optimal return you can get out of that portfolio. And at the bottom, the horizontal line down here, you can measure risk, how much risk it takes to get that return, okay? So let's start over here in stocks. Let's say somebody said, Randy, I want to move all my money over in 100% stock. Well, they're going to be down here on the risk profile, the furthest out, at about 17.5. So they've got to take 17.5 of that, and I'm not going to get into defining how they calculate that number. But they got to take that 17.5 to get it right at about 11.5. It's right between 11 and 12% return, okay? Another client can come in and say, well, I want to be 50% stocks and 50% bonds. I want to be a little bit more diversified. So they're going to have their dollars allocated more toward this end over here. They're going to be anywhere between 10 and 11%, which would be a 10.5% return. And then with that 10.5% return, I'm only 11 in this one, okay? So I'm taking about 35 to 40% less risk and only giving up about 1% return, okay? And so with our clients that we work with at Trustmark, our objective is to take the least amount of risk we can do, but take advantage of the opportunities when they present themselves from a return perspective. And so if you look here in this chart here, unfortunately, most of us are in this upper quadrant over here, and that we don't realize that there's probably ways that you can benefit and utilize the market in your favor and create a diversified portfolio. Because what that 50-50 stock portfolio is going to do, it's going to allow you to stay with the market, okay? You know, it's not going to let your emotions take you. That's the whole goal. Jerry and I always say, the most critical time we have a client or family is getting through that first correction. If we get them in the right spot, okay, and we get them where we feel like they are from a risk perspective, if we can carry them through that, whether it's a 9-month or 18-month period, once we get that, they'll be a client for life. But getting them through that first correction is the toughest part, okay? Any questions on that? Briefly, I'm going to touch on retirement. I'm not going to hit a lot on this. Retirement, of course, basically thinking about retirement, there's a lot of different risks that can affect you from a retirement standpoint. What's your withdrawal rate going to be? What's sustainable? We'll talk about that a little bit more here in this presentation. Retirement spending, how much will you need? Based on what income I have today, how much additional, what percentage of my income am I going to need once I retire? Market volatility, am I saving enough? Longevity risk, which that's probably one of your biggest impacts to someone's retirement. Longevity, living possibly a good chance into your 90s. And then two, unless the good Lord's nice to us, we're probably going to need some type of in-home care or go to a nursing home. At the end of the day, the bottom line, that's what's going to happen. Unless we're fortunate enough to do that. So that's probably going to be one of your biggest impacts to you is the longevity side and the nursing home side. And then this right here, which a lot of people don't talk about, inflation. It's there, it's real. A lot of times you don't feel it, you don't see it. But if you see in the bottom part there, it shows average inflation over the last 30, 20, and 10 years. It's really been kind of mild. I mean, it's not 2.3 to 2.8. That's just not high inflation. But look at what inflation does. You say that somebody retires, let's just say the little one at 30 years ago, they're sitting here at 60, they're ready to go to the house. Inflation remains at 3% over that period of time. They're $500,000, they go into retirement with at 60. If they didn't keep up with inflation, their $500,000 is now sitting at about $205. Okay, that's how much it can eat away at your money if you're not staying. And that's what makes it difficult in this environment, because Cash equivalents and things like that aren't paying anything. CDs aren't paying anything. You can't afford.
Talking about the inflation rate, have they actually changed the way they calculate that, or is that the actual true?
Yeah, they hadn't changed, from my understanding, they hadn't, that number there is the true rate that they've
It's
always.
just hard to understand how groceries and gasoline have gone up so much.
Oh, I know, it's hard.
And it's only 2%.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I'd say more people say, look at that number and say, no, it's a lot more. Or you get your bag of chips and now it's about a quarter of the bag full. It's not, and you're paying more money. So, definitely there is some, I agree with you there that definitely there's some, debate on what actual inflation is. But just, if that is the true number, if that were the number, you could see that. But I would say if it were any, one way or the other, it could be probably worse than what we've, in the way they calculate it. The other side of it is taxes. So, basically, if you decide today, because very few people today, especially if you're in your 60s, my dad wanted to do this. I'm like, hell, I wish he had enough money, but you can't do it. He's retired now, but he thought he was going to go into CDs and just shut it down. Well, you can't afford to do that unless you've got a lot of money and you've got a ton of savings. You've got to continue to try to grow your assets in some form or fashion. And you can do it in a very cautious way. But I think what happens to investors, they remember that experience they had years ago, and they just say, that's the only thing I know of the market, and that's what it did. I'm not getting back in it. But there are, trust me, ways that you can use the market to your benefit and use it within your risk tolerance. But if you see here, if you're not in stocks or bonds, the light blue on stocks, that just shows you the real return. That just shows you after taxes and inflation, what really you're making year in, year out on those asset classes. Bonds, you're just barely treading above water there. And then, of course, right now in today's market, you're actually losing money. If you said, Randy, it just helps me sleep at night to have it in cash equivalents like CDs and annuities and things like that. So it's really important to try to find out the advisor out there, go over this week and try to get you, our job is to not get you in some investment or program that you're not comfortable with. That's not good for either one of us. You're not going to be a long-time fund. Just try to make you find the right mix for you that's going to achieve your goals there. This here just kind of backs up y'all need to be planning for a long life. I know a lot of times we like to be humble and say, I don't know, I hope I have a long life, but the odds are you probably will. You probably will, especially if a husband and wife are 65 years old today and both of them are healthy. You see that 50% over there to the left, there's an 85% chance us males are going to live till 85. There's a 50% chance that the ladies in the room here will live to 88. And then if you're married, there's a more than 50% chance that one of the two spouses is probably going to live to age 90. Okay? And so for families trying to plan for retirement, it's not planning for 10 or 15 years. You're planning for potentially 20 or 30 years, if you want to improve it. This here is kind of telling you, I'm talking about, everybody wants to know what their number is. What's my number? What is the number that I can get to when I'm 60 or 65, or how do I find that number? And how much is it going to pay me? And how much can I hopefully take out of that and feel comfortable that it will sustain my retirement? This here basically gives you 5 portfolios that you see listed there on the bottom. 100% bonds, all the way to 100% stocks, okay? Well, this is for somebody retiring. So let's take 100% stocks out of the equation. Nobody's going to be 100% stocks if they're going into retirement. And so typically where most clients are going to fit are going to be in that 75% B, which is bonds, or 25% stocks, or 50% B, which is bonds, and 50% stocks. Most clients are going to fit within that risk factor. Say, that's what I need to maintain my standard of living today, and then also sustain it for potentially a 25-year period into retirement. So if that is the objective, what is the odds of me making it based on the withdrawal rate that I take off my money, okay? So how this works is let's say that you had $100,000 saved up for retirement. That's what we have. Well, if you've got $100,000 and we're going to we're on the same page and feel like we need to be in one of those 2 portfolios there, then if we want a 90% confidence, 90% chance that we're going to meet our retirement needs not only today, but in the future 25 years, if you see in that top yellow box, we only need to take a 4% withdrawal rate out, and we would be at 97% and 96%, okay? If we said no, I'd actually need 5% off my investments each and every year. If you needed 5% off your investments, see how much 1 percentage point drops the overall odds of you being able to make it. So 27% and then 96 down to 79%, okay? If you come to us at Trustmark, we want to try to get you around that 4% withdrawal rate is what we call it, okay? We think that's prudent, that number to work around, and then if you let us work with you in one of these similar allocations here, we think we can meet your needs and also keep up with inflation. That's huge, okay? So this is talking about not only providing for your needs today, but keeping up with for inflation in the future. Why do I say that is there's a lot of products out there with all kind of bells. It's kind of like going to Waffle House. You know, scatter, smother, chunk, guarantee this, all that. At the end of the day, what do wealthy people do? They do this right here. It's just blocking and tackling, creating a diversified portfolio. They don't buy all those different unique investments, okay? But with that, a lot of those unique investments, you know, the one thing they don't factor in, inflation. So they say they're going to give you 4% for life or 5% for life, but the big thing they don't tell you about is inflation. Well, Jerry and I know that if somebody came to us and said, Randy, I'm retiring at 62, and you don't have to factor in inflation, just give me, you know, what I need each month, and I'm not going to hold you to the inflation side of it, that'd be easy, or much easier than trying to give somebody about a 2 to 3% raise each year to factor that in, okay?
Can I ask a
Yeah.
question? On this calculation up here, you're talking about just that $100,000 investment.
Yeah.
You're not counting, and 4% of that, you're not counting other income like Social
No.
Security or a retirement plan that you had from the state or something like that.
Exactly. So what
This 4% would be added to that for you to know how much I got to spend this month.
you got it. So I get 1,000 here, I'm getting 1,500 from Social Security, and now the only supplemental savings I've got, Randy, is this 100,000. How much more can I get off it a year comfortably? $4,000. So that would be the number that we would be comfortable saying outside of your other income sources that you have. I think 4, 5 at most, but we feel more comfortable.
So a good place to be would be for your retirement needs to be able to be met by your other income. So that continues to be rolled over, reinvested.
Oh,
Okay.
that would be the perfect scenario.
Okay.
Yeah, so, yeah, anybody that's got a pension, PERS retirement through the state, you know, anything like that, Social Security, those are great, but you don't have to worry about the market. You don't even have to worry about what your diversification is. That check's coming every month, okay? But this is talking about outside of those different income sources that you've got. If you've got to supplement and find another $1,000 out there a month, then this is what we're looking at. And so right now you've got 100,000, and we can give you 4,000 a year. But that's not going to make up that $1,000. Okay, good question. Any other questions on that? Okay, fun topic, estate planning. Talking about dying. My wife, she wonders about it. I don't know if Jerry's wonders about him. Because I always get talked about wills and trusts and people dying and family dynamics. And we have learned this. It wasn't just our families that weren't perfect. Nobody's family is perfect. So we all got stuff, you know. And so you put it off long enough to try to figure out how to plan for them and how to plan for our beneficiaries. And Jerry and I do a great deal. This is talking about trying to transfer that wealth in that. First of all, let's get taxes out of the way. Do I owe any taxes? Am I going to owe any taxes? And y'all may already had some of this today. But real simply today, under the current tax law system, if you're married, you have a total of $10,680,000. If you're not married, you have $5,340,000 that you can pass free of tax. Okay? So each spouse gets $5,340,000, and then if they're married, you got $10,680,000. So somebody with a taxable estate today that was married would have to have a taxable estate of $11 million or more before they have to pay taxes. If you were single, you'd have to have a taxable estate of $5.5 million, $6 million before you'd have to worry about having to pay any type of tax. Okay? Let's talk about how they compute that.
What would happen if a husband and wife, if the husband dies, and in the will, everything goes to the wife, and then 2 months later she dies, is she limited to that 5.3 at that point?
No,
Okay.
she get to 10.6, and there's a new law, and I'm not gonna get into it, but this is why, any of this that we talked about today, before y'all start to do anything, please talk to an advisor, or, there's something called portability. So if you die today, you didn't use, I call it coupons. You got 5,340,000 coupon, you're gonna turn it into debt, okay? Well, let's say at your death, you die, you leave all your assets typically to your spouse. There's only tax forms when you're closing out your estate. There's something called portability that you have to recognize that you're transferring your $5,340,000 coupon exemption over to your spouse. If you've done that on your tax forms, you get $10,680,000. But if you went and had somebody closing your estate and they didn't fill out the tax forms right, a husband and wife could only have $5,340,000. They lost one of the coupons. So it's critical that when you're in those types of discussions, make sure you're talking to folks that work in that area. How do you figure it out? It's pretty straightforward. You just take the market value of all your assets. So all the assets that anybody owns, you got to get appraisals and all of that for any land that you have, a business you may have. You got to get a collection of all the inventory. And it's one thing that most people forget about is life insurance. Life insurance is income tax free, but it's not estate tax free. Okay? So if you're sitting there and we're adding up all your assets and you got $1 million life insurance policy that you own, then that policy, that $1 million is going to be added to that total number. Okay? So a lot of times people can have sizable insurance policies that might throw them up above that $5,340,000, or if it threw them up above that 10, you might want to just, look into that and see. There's ways you can get away to keep your taxes from being, your insurance from being taxed. But if you're not above that $5,340,000 or $10,680,000, I wouldn't worry about it. But if you felt like you were, at some point could get above that number, you may want to revisit your insurance because there's some different ways you can own that, those types of policies.
Do you capitalize or monetize the value of the accrual reserves?
Jerry, how would, do you know how a valuation that's death, how they value? I'm not sure how they value. Like, so at your death, they would have to put a valuation on that remaining interest. Are you know?
You're talking about the license?
No, you're talking about the oil, right?
You die, you leave the mineral interest,
Mm-hmm.
and that mineral interest has value.
Exactly.
So how do you calculate, you have to estimate the reserves, and estimate the price of oil, and estimate the depletion rates. But let's say you die and you leave $1 million worth of oil rights. Is it $1 million worth of, could be dry hole that's worth nothing?
Yeah.
So how do you put a value on that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Who does that? You let the IRS do it, they'll come up with our numbers alone.
Well, your tax attorney is going to work closely. If you have a situation like that, you're going to have a tax attorney involved to help with those valuations. And I would recommend somebody that wears the tax, has an LLM, a master's in it, that knows how to do it. And then what they're going to do is they're going to help put a value on it. And their job is to definitely get it to your advantage. Value that's going to work to your advantage. But also value it in a way that the IRS agent sitting up in Jackson is going to approve. Okay? Because, if you get into a situation where you have a decent estate, I guarantee you here in the state of Mississippi, they're going to look at that estate, because there's not many large estates that come through. And so you got Johnny up there, he's ready to break it down, look at it, make sure you put appropriate valuations on it. But I'm not sure exactly how, I wouldn't know the answer to that question, how they value that, how they factor it. Like you said, you could do it and not be anything. But if you do exceed any of those numbers, the $5,340,000, $10,680,000, you would get a 40% tax on those dollars. So every dollar above those limits is taxed at 40%. And then also Mississippi and Louisiana. Anybody from Louisiana in here? Okay. So Louisiana, from what I understand, either does not have an inheritance. They do? No,
Yeah.
but don't have minutes, right?
No, it's
Thought-
about 10 or 15 years ago, I think.
They eliminated that. Okay. Okay. Of all the families we meet with, this is probably 9 out of 10 times where we do most of the work, okay? Assets pass one of three ways, okay? So when someone dies, they're gonna pass one of three ways. They're gonna pass what we call by contract, by operation of law, or by your will. Well, by contract, you see, that's what it is. Life insurance, retirement accounts, annuities, POD accounts, trust accounts, IRAs, all those accounts have beneficiaries on them, okay? So any accounts that you put as POD or IRAs that you have out there, a lot of times you did this years ago, and most people, we call it the 10-second estate plan. You sit there and they shove that beneficiary form over to you, and you write down a couple of names. You may not even write the social, because I don't know it right now, and that's who's getting that asset. So any of those types of instruments that you own, they're not going to flow through your will. They're going to just pull that beneficiary form you filled out 15 years ago and say, well, it goes to that person and that person. That's who we're paying to. Okay? I'm not a big fan of POD accounts. So if you do POD accounts, I'm not a big fan of those, because those don't have, if you put anybody on there as a beneficiary and they predecease you, most of the time we're not on, it's hard to be on top of this stuff when we are thinking about it. Much less when somebody happens, I'm not thinking, I need you to get a POD account. If you have a POD account like that, they've predeceased you, there's a great chance that whoever's left on there that's already passed away is probably not going to the person you want it to go to. The institutional, they've got a way that they're supposed to flow that money of who gets it next, and it's probably not going to be who you intended that money to go to. I prefer, if you're going to take the time to draft a will, then let your will take care of your assets. Because your will is your picture you took time to think about, and that's what I want it to look like at the end. So why not let your assets flow through there and let it take care of that piece of it and dispose of the property. Joint accounts, the only joint accounts that I like are joint accounts that are with spouses. I wouldn't put children on there. I know a lot of times it's kind of a simple way to do things. You bring in that whole what if of the litigation thing. If something happens, could they be, am I subjecting my asset to any of my children's creditors or whoever's after them now that they're on here as an account holder. And so any joint account out there is typically we would say the husband and wife. If you had any joint property with a spouse, at your death, that's automatically going to go to that joint spouse, that surviving spouse. It's not going to go through your will. So basically the first two bypass your will. Now you've sat down and created this will, what's going to flow through it? If all that's going outside the will, it's any assets you own in your individual name. So if you've got a piece of property out there, if you own a CD out there, or whatever that you're on in individual name, that's when they go in, your executor goes in to probate your wills through the court system. That is what's going to be flowing through that will there, okay? And as most of you know, I know this class is different, because y'all are probably not 70% of us in this class are not without a will. I'm sure most of us in this room probably have a will. I'm particularly not. But 70% of Americans don't have wills. I mean, that's just common. It's easy to put on, regardless if we've got
An updated will.
there you go. That's even better said. That's even better said. Okay. I apologize for not having intestate law in Louisiana. But I do have them from Mississippi. If you passed away in Mississippi, this is how it would happen. So if you allowed the state of Mississippi to create that will for you, which they have one for all of us, so anybody that doesn't have a will in here, you got one on file with the state. Here's what it says. Should an individual die without a will, then their spouse will get a child share of the probate estate. So how that works is, the first spouse dies, they leave 3 children, there's a $400,000 probate estate total, and so each child plus the spouse is going to get 25% each. I don't know many husband and wives that want to only get a fourth of, their spouse's, inheritance there. So that's why it's so critical to have a will in place and have that document in place to make sure that you leave your assets to all your assets to your spouse, which most people probably do, and then provide for children after that. So, nothing wrong with leaving it to the children or leaving some assets, but the state of Mississippi, that's just how their process works. Considerations when drafting the will. Consider request, specific request. That's just if y'all hadn't drafted a will, when you sit down with that attorney, you need to think about what type of specific request. I've got 2 kids, and I want my son to have this piece of property over here, and I want my daughter to have this ring or this jewelry. They're going to ask you what type of specifics do you want itemized out for for 2 children, or 3 or 4 children, or grandchildren, whoever it may be. Once you get through that, if you have guardians, if you have minor children, a will is definitely important to make sure you name a guardian in there to take care of them in case instead of having to go through the court systems and let them tell you who's best, suited to take care of your kids. And then naming an executor. So that's the person that's going to probate your will, take it to the courts, and carry out your wishes with your will. I typically recommend that at the first death, especially if it's not a complex estate, typically have your surviving spouse provide those duties for you. At the second death, depending on the size of your estate, you can choose a child. I don't know if your children don't live here, that's probably not the best way because they've got to come to they've got to probate it in the county that you're living in at that time. So if a child's sitting over in Birmingham, they're probably not the best person to be probating a will over here in mid-county. Okay, so if you're looking for options, then someone like a corporate executive or something, that's what we do. We administer and probate wills for families and stuff. But you can name your children as that if you felt like that they were willing to do it. And some people name like a child and give them the option. If they choose not to do that, once that day comes, then I name Trustmark National Bank as and then let them and give them the option. And then lastly, consider a testamentary trust. What is a testamentary trust? When you do your will, after you've done the specifics and things like that, who you want to get what assets, the next thing is how do you want to leave these assets to them? Do you want to leave them outright, or do you want to leave them in trust? Okay? Well, typically, when you do a testamentary trust, that is not a trust that's living today with any assets. That is only a trust that's created at death. Okay? Once death occurs, instead of taking this section of the assets and giving it outright to my daughter or my son, I'm going to carve this section out, and that's going into trust for the benefit of them. Okay? So it starts, it kind of gets a heartbeat at that time when death occurs. Most people think of trust, or people that have a trust, either one, we're not getting into the subject today, we're talking outside of this, it's for tax purposes, to save on taxes. Well, most people's estate is not $5 or $10 million today. And so you don't see many people using that as much as a need because the exemptions have gone up so much how much you can pass. But the other reason more people, or the commonality of why people think you have trust is for to have beneficiaries that can't take care of themselves. For years you think, I got 2 kids and my daughter does everything right, my son can't do anything right, And for him, somebody got to take care of him because he'll have this money blown in, okay? And most of the time you thought that was the only reason you create a trust when that child gets to that point and to protect him. Well, really, and what Jerry and I have seen and what we see this trend changing over the years is really the trust can be a very valuable tool for even people that really, have it together and make good decisions. One would be for professional management for loved ones. Well, what's that do? Okay? This is a trust I have set up for my spouse. So all of my insurance, which would be a decent amount, all my assets flow to a trust. Okay? It's not because I don't trust her or want to disinherit her. It's just from a financial side, that is my strength, I guess, within the family, is kind of understanding that. And she allows me to do that. Well, the last thing I want to do if something happens to me is put her in a position that now she's got to figure out, where do I go? Who do I go to? I've gone to A, B, and C advisor. I've come here, who's telling me they're talking about this investment and that? Who do I trust? Who can I even trust here? I don't want to put my wife in that position. And so basically at my death, it goes into a trust, it has a corporate trustee over it. They're going to manage it based on the fundamentals of investment and what we talked about. And she'll be more than taken care of. And she doesn't have to worry about that when that comes.
And an important thing for everybody is to have all this paperwork in one file,
Exactly.
so that, and tell everybody where this file is, so at the time of death, everybody's not searching under every rock and tin can buried in the backyard, you know.
I agree with you.
Thank goodness my father put all that, the loose ends together. And when he passed away, my sister went in there and pulled the packet and it had all the information in there.
Yeah.
And it was, we were all shocked, but thankful that he had to,
It makes things a lot easier.
oh, yeah.
We've done a number of family meetings where we've sat down with the parents, kind of got them squared away on kind of what you need to be thinking about and doing, and then having that meeting with the children. I think at some point it's always great to have that conversation, you know, and stuff is already any surprises out there. So we've done a lot of those family meetings where now we kind of map it out and show them kind of this is kind of what we plan and this is where everything's at.
Tell us about some of the horror stories too.
We got plenty of them. How much time we got? I just looked at my watch and I got 13 minutes here. I'm on brief right now, revocable trust. That's the only other type of trust. You got testamentary at death, revocable. That's why you're living. That's when people fund assets while they're living and put assets in the trust. Once you put assets, basically it could be the Randy Williams revocable trust would be the name of it. And then I move my checking account in there. My investment account would be styled under that name and so forth. My land would be styled under that name. I can change it at any time. But typically where Jerry and I see this most useful, a lot of times they can be misused and missold, folks, I think, is people that are getting older want to plan for incapacity, okay? Especially if they don't have children or children locally, or just don't want to put their children and create that dynamic where now they've got to care for their day-to-day needs. A lot of people do a revocable trust, typically maybe as you get older, that says, if I become incapacitated, I'm still controlling all my assets, and then I can change it at any time. But if the day comes, then I've got that all planned where somebody can carry on my affairs for me, okay? So that's just kind of a contingency agreement that people put in place that if something does happen to me down the road, and I can't carry on my day-to-day affairs, then it's not going to the court systems to go into a conservatorship account, and now the children are working through the court to try to figure out how to take care of mom and dad. I'm on. Briefly on trustee, with all trust, if you establish a trust or feel like that's a need, you can set up, the trustee can be a family member, friend, business, partner, advisor, or corporate trustee. This is not because we are corporate trustees, but unless it's trustee over a minor, I'm always for having a corporate trustee. So unless you're setting up a trust for a 2-year-old or a 10-year-old, I always think the corporate trustee is a better dynamic for the family than naming an individual. Why? Take my sister and brother-in-law. They have 2 children. I don't mind serving as trustee on their trust if something were to tragically happen to them right now as they have 2 young children, okay? But I don't really want to be working with my niece and nephew when they're 30 and they're married and they've got their kids and their spouses, and now I'm the one that has to tell them, no, you can't have that distribution, or yep, you can. It's different when they're 12 and 13, but if you're talking about leaving assets in trust for adult children, I would highly advise you to consider a corporate trustee out there to do that, to be that decision maker. And I never would put, one of the worst things Jerry and I see is you got the good child and the can't get right child, and you put the good child over the can't get. And that's just the dynamics that never gonna work. You know, and the good child, they may say, yes, I guess I'll do it, but they really don't want to do it. You know, so take some time and think about that, and that's a big decision when you do that on the trustee side. And then 2 other real quick important documents is the power of attorney. If y'all don't have those documents in place, you definitely need to get those. That would be where you just name an agent, typically a spouse or a child, that if you can't make those financial decisions and you didn't do that revocable trust like I talked about, you would have this document on file. If you do create that, financial institutions don't have to honor that, so you want to make sure that whoever you're currently working with, that they'll accept that agreement. A lot of them won't accept it, so you need to make sure of that. And then your dad's health care directive. You need to make sure you've got that in place as well for medical decisions. And last, hopefully, all this continues to be successful in years from now. You know, y'all have benefited from the fruits, and things work out really, really well. And you get to a point where you're thinking about gifting. Just a few little thoughts, and we'll wrap it up here on gifting. This year, you can gift $14,000 per child or grandchild to anyone you want. Okay. If you're married, y'all could do $28,000. Okay, if you want to start a little gifting, doesn't count against you, no taxes. And then if you had an estate problem or you really wanted to do some big gifts, you can gift that $5,340,000. You don't have to wait till you're pass away to turn it in. You can turn it in and start using some of it while you're living. Okay, and so that can be used while you're living as well. And then outside of those gifts there, you can do over and above that. If y'all had a grandchild that was going to college, that's a great way where if the grandparent just pays that money directly to the college, there's no tax consequences, and it doesn't even count against your $14,000. Also for medical expenses too. And so hopefully you get to a point where you can, if you want to do some of those things and consider, those would be great avenues there for as gifting goes. I'm not going to get into that one there. Quick scenario here, making gifts while you're living. The reason I'm talking about this is I was over in Liberty and had a meeting with an individual client, and they had gone ahead and gifted some land away. Well, before, as this assets come in and you feel like your financial picture get to a point where you think you can start gifting assets, just be aware of how all this works. When you gift assets while you're living, this acres of land, so let's say Mr. and Miss Jones, 82 and 80, they own 100 acres of land they purchased in 1974 for $10,000. Today they sell the 100 acres. Today the 100 acres is worth $100,000, so it's grown $90,000. They give the 100 acres of land to their son. So they decide, right now while we're living, we're going to give this to Johnny, and give Johnny land over to him. The son now owns the land with the parent's cost basis, what you paid for it back in 1974. So Johnny owns that land. It's valued at 100, but he owns it, and the basis is 10,000. Okay? Johnny says, I think I'm going to sell this land. So he sells it for $100,000. Johnny's going to pay $90,000 worth of capital gains tax if he does that, by going ahead and gifting that. Depending on what your situation is, this would be a better way, or more discussion needs to be had with the advisor just before you start giving property away to see what you're doing. This here, same scenario, but leaving it at death. So you give the 100 acres of land that was purchased in 1974 for $10,000. Today it's worth 100. And so instead of getting it at death during while she was living, she gave it to him at death, the 100 acres. And so there's something now, instead of getting that $10,000 basis, he gets a step up, what they call a step up in basis. So which would be $100,000. That's whatever the value of the land is that mom or dad died. So now my new basis is 100. Well, because it's 100, say Johnny says, I'm going to keep it a year, it grows to 110. He goes out and sells it. Instead of owing taxes on that 90 plus the 10, he's only going to owe taxes on 10,000. So especially later as we get in life too, we definitely don't want to just be handing out assets because there may be some tax implications that are not to your advantage in doing things like that. So definitely consider that. And that's it. Y'all survived it.
Could you comment on family limited partnership?
Yeah, that's a technique for gifting. And so what people are doing there is when you gift assets, okay? I'm going to go back to the slide and I'll show you. It's the one I skipped. If you get a family that gets to a point where they want to start bringing other members of the family in there and start giving some interest away, okay? And this is going to be something that's ongoing, okay? What's more advantageous, instead of like in this example here, Miss Jones gives her farmland for $1 million, okay? Well, instead of gifting that land over to these 4 children for $1 million, what they could do is set up what they call a family limited partnership. You could do a limited liability company, LLC. And what they will do is, instead of giving it like that, they will give it through a family limited partner or LLC and make them a minority shareholder, okay? And when that makes them a minority shareholder, you're gonna get what they call discounts based on the gift that you're giving them, okay? Because if somebody has a minority interest in something, it's not worth its full value, okay? It's got a lack of marketability discount, because if you're a minority, you can't just go out and sell it. So it's really, truly not worth $1 million, because the kid really doesn't have a lot of control, because typically the parent or whoever set it up retain the majority, the general partner interest. It's actually managing it, so they control it at the end of the day. So since they have all the control, the kid's interest is very little. And so what the IRS says is you can take that $1 million and gift over a nice piece of land to these 3 or 4 children, and instead of using $1 million of your exemption, through discounts, they will let you discount that gift down, typically by $300,000 or $400,000. So even though you're getting $1 million out of your estate, you're only putting on your tax form that you're gifting $600,000. So it's a way to leverage. When people do family limited partnerships and those LLCs with multiple partners, they're creating those to leverage that gift. So really, somebody that had $5,340,000 that you could give away, turning your coupon, if you create those type of entities out there, you can possibly leverage that up to where you could probably give about $8 million straight away. But in reality, you're only using your $5,340,000.
But in that example, in this example, you would still lose the step up.
Yeah, you got it. So you got to factor that in. So I would say before you get to this, when you get it, you need to talk to some professionals and make sure this is what's in the best interest, not only today, but how it's going to affect us 5, 10 years down the road. Because this gets into bigger, more detail. Good question. Any other thoughts or?
Yeah, when the general partner dies, how do you go about deciding who writes the checks? Who sells the land?
So the general partner will typically, within his will, when Jerry's going to dispose of the general partnership interest. So at the general partnership death, it's going to tell you, that will is going to tell you who's going to be the controlling interest there. Like we have in a trust or several trusts where we're the general partner. And so we're the decision maker. We own the 1% interest within it. And so typically, whoever that is, and typically it's a mother or mom or dad, they should have in there who gets that decided, that controlling interest there.
How's that $5 million tax exempt or gift exempt? Does that include your tithes and offerings? Or is that separate?
That's separate. So you get a full deduction off that. Typically, you don't want to. This isn't how much you give to charities. You are capped, and I believe the carry forward is maybe 5 years. Don't hold me to that. But as you're gifting to different charitable organizations and things like that, you want to just be cognizant. You don't give too much in a year that you lose the amount of the deduction. You can give too. We had someone, they were gifted more, and they weren't allowed to lose their deduction. And you can only carry forward those that you didn't use, but it does not count against you there. For that. And then gifting, I would encourage, if you thought about doing something for charity, one of the best assets to gift is your retirement account. An IRA, if you have a $20,000 IRA, because if you give it to your son, they're getting only 70% of that IRA because they got to pay taxes on it. So if you give it to charity, then they're going to get the full $20,000. So if you're looking at your overall assets and you said, how are different ways we can do some planning, a lot of times retirement accounts are great vehicles to consider for charity purposes. Good questions. Any others?